Previously on the 8 Question Show.
In petri dishes, we've seen that high concentrations of THC in cannabis oil can kill cancer cells.
Can't afford, that's why I'm front line, hand the sword. I do this all for myself, not the cash or no damn award. I need intelligence to craft my bars. I need the medicine that grows effervescent from the hands of God. I need inheritance to slash the odds, create a pipeline to the well while you grasp for straws. 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions.
Welcome back to the 8 Question Show, where we inject your brain with knowledge by asking the right question.
We're back today with Mike Z, cannabis business coach and now professor. Question 3, Mike. What is the value of a cannabis education? We're seeing it in a lot of schools, even where we're filming right now. A couple of universities just added an entire curriculum specifically for cannabis, and you're spearheading a new program as well. So take us through this. Where do you see this going? What is the value of a cannabis education?
Before you answer that, Mike, let the people know where you're a professor at.
Yeah. Great. So I'm a professor at LIM College in Manhattan, and I'm the academic director of our cannabis programs there. We're launching the first bachelor's and master's degree programs in New York State having to do with anything cannabis. And ours are specifically on the business of cannabis. And so I'm consider myself exceptionally lucky to be in that position, to be making history in cannabis education in my home state of New York. And what's the value of a cannabis education? You know, for some people, it could be literally life-saving. If, you know, you have a certain medical condition and, you know, discovering cannabis medicine. I've heard stories from people I've met over the years that it has been life-saving or life-changing and giving people a higher quality of life and getting them off opioids, getting them off other drugs. So, you know, in that regard, but I don't think that's what you're really talking about. As far as higher ed and a formal education, I think, again, I'm going to stick with life-changing, because if I were going to college right now, if I were, you know, a teenager, here you have an industry that employs just over 420,000 people in the US today. And that number is projected to hit over 1 million in about a decade's time. So you're talking about more than 500,000 jobs that are going to be created in this growth industry, where up until very recently, no one was educated in this field. So it's brand new. And, you know, I think there's something like 400,000 students every year that graduate with a business degree, undergrad business degree in the US. You know, to go get a degree in the business of cannabis in the near future, you would be in the 0.1% of business students that have any kind of cannabis education.
Interesting.
And you got all these jobs coming. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of cannabis leaders. You know, in my book, I've interviewed 50 leaders across the industry from all over the world. And, you know, I ask them, what's the challenge? And often it's finding good people, finding someone who knows both business and cannabis. Often you have people that either know business really well and have no cannabis education, or people that know cannabis well, but don't have either credentials or business skills. And so, you know, I think the importance of having higher ed institutions embrace cannabis and offer cannabis degrees and start doing cannabis and hemp research, I think it legitimizes the industry. It helps make it more mainstream, but also creates opportunity for people that want to switch careers or just start a career in a booming industry that, you know, I believe a lot of young people are passionate about and curious about. And, you know, I think this will pave the way to maybe a few years from now, we'll see degrees in psychedelics or in, you know, other kind of fringe, if you will, industries or areas. But, I think 10, 20 years from now, it's going to be so common and boring that people won't even think twice when you're at Harvard Business School or Stanford and you're learning about cannabis as an industry or whatnot, or as case studies. I think it'll be so regular that people won't even think twice.
I'm actually curious from both of your perspective. Why do you think schools now are being so receptive to learning about or caring about it so much that is being put in schools for people to learn about? Like, why would you think they're now more open to it?
Yeah, I think they understand that there's a need, that the industry needs trained, educated people to scale and mature. But also, I think the truth of it is that higher ed, if you look at those numbers, enrollments are going down.
Oh, that.
Fewer people are going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's many alternatives thanks to technology, right? Whereas cannabis, it's never been offered before in a higher ed setting. I think there's a lot of excitement about it. So I think for a lot of schools, they see it as a way to drive enrollment and stay relevant and, stay in business.
Mm-hmm.
But also I think they're evolving and adapting with the times because they realize that, hey, this is not going away. This industry is here. It's not going anywhere. And people need this education. Now, it's not just in higher ed, but also in the medical community. Most medical schools aren't teaching anything cannabis related still, which is a real shame. Again, thanks to that Schedule I status. But even people who don't want to work in the cannabis industry or want nothing to do with cannabis, I believe would benefit from getting a cannabis education and learning about cannabis, because whether you're a policymaker, law enforcement, in the medical field, a psychiatrist, or, any of these different worlds that cannabis touches. And again, cannabis isn't going anywhere. So to me, it's really a question of, do you want to be ahead of the curve or do you want to play catch up later?
I thought you were going to say that higher ed was always very embracing of cannabis because half the professors use it.
Well, it's certainly on most college campuses.
It certainly is.
Oh, for sure.
So I have a question relating to the education component. So let's say someone wanted to, I guess the way I would phrase it is, why not just study botany or why not just study business? What is the value add or what is the difference in focusing specifically on the cannabis business or growing cannabis rather than just being like a botanist or businessman or woman?
No, it's a great question. I certainly believe there's value in specializing. If, for example, that you want to grow cannabis, if that's your passion, then go get a degree that's more cultivation focused, or go study botany, or, by all means. Or if you want to be on the extraction side of things or on the more of the medical side of things in the lab, go study chemistry. You can do that. But cannabis is unique. And I think outside of that, the industry really wants people that are devoted to cannabis. So I think showing that you're willing to invest in a cannabis education, that you really want to be in cannabis, I think that's going to put you to the top of the list for employers, because one, they're not going to have to spend the 6 months to a year teaching you the basics, but two, they're going to know that this person really cares about it for the long haul. Now, our programs, I should say, are kind of general. So the undergrad program is a bachelor's in business administration. So you're actually getting all of the traditional business, the liberal arts, the general education requirement. You're getting all of that stuff. And on top of that, you're getting 30 credits of cannabis business specialized knowledge that you really can only get at a handful of places in the world right now. 98% of the schools in America don't have any cannabis offering today. And on the master's degree program, I think it's really for people. We had the program in mind for people who are switching careers. So maybe you're a real estate agent or a compliance officer or an accountant or, any number of these other positions where you see an opportunity to play in the cannabis economy, or you want to be serving a cannabis clientele or anything like that. I think it's really important to have that well-rounded view of the industry, to understand the supply chain, to understand regulations and compliance, to understand the science and cultivation and all that. And then cannabis has all these unique regulations. So to retail or market cannabis, it's a lot harder than, selling books. And, even this book, I can't advertise it on Facebook because they banned me. They banned me years ago for promoting posts about cannabis events and sharing news articles from mainstream publications. But because the word cannabis is in there, it gets flagged. Yeah. So anyway.
One thing that you said, Mike,
yeah,
that reminded me of one of the points you brought up in your book, which I've read your book before. It's an excellent book.
Thanks.
You said that there were so many people, I forget how you refer to them, but kind of like the OGs of cannabis that put their life and limb on the line while it was still illegal, that sometimes would have to run away from the cops and hide their children from helicopters, that in a way, the future of the industry has to pay homage to those that risked all of that while it was still illegal.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like the degree is kind of like, hey guys, look, I'm willing to pay tuition to show that I'm.
It's funny you say that, Brian, because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she just became chief legal officer for this cannabis business.
Oh, wow.
And they give incentives for people who was federally committed, was in jail due to a federal offense. If they were jailed for cannabis or whatever.
Really?
And they have to it's two criteria. You have had to be jailed federally for a cannabis conviction, and have 2 years of business experience. And then they'll help you out with building the cannabis business.
Yeah.
That's innovative.
So what she's doing is putting together this packet so they can get the license to grow or something like that. She's putting together this whole legal packet and they have to submit it. Then they'll hear back in 2 or 3 months. So it's like you said, it's almost like they're paying homage to they know that, going back to the first show where you was how cultures throughout history have used it for a good use. And we're going to get into this more in the next show, but now it seems like that it's almost becoming way more lenient, and then they're trying to say almost I'm sorry. So if you do this and this, we'll help you build your business and give you all these incentives to do so. But I want to ask you a question, Mike, in terms of the education piece of it. Because now you have places in Washington and Colorado and California, and most of these people have business minds, but then they had to figure out, okay, how to grow it, how to scale the growth of my farm or whatever the case may be. Where do people, if somebody wants to go down that road from an education standpoint, where can they start to learn how to do all this stuff?
Yeah, so there are schools that are offering what I would consider more of the hands-on technical education of, if you want to be a farmer, and you could go learn all about how to grow cannabis, and whether you want to do it indoor or outdoor, there's programs for that. There's some that are more medical focused. So I think that as more and more schools create cannabis programs, you're going to see more of this specialization. But it's interesting what you guys are talking about, the restorative kind of reparative nature of it, because again, going back to what we talked about before, there was a lot of harm to Black and brown communities. And I actually try to enumerate it in my book. And the number that I come up with is I feel like it was over $1 trillion of harm. If you look at, you know, the generational impact and how much incarceration and removing people from their families and just like, you know, their lost wages and their earning over their lifetime, how all that stuff on average is affected. And then I also use the number that, you know, there's some government analysis that they value. Here's a fun fact. They value I was like, what does the government value a human life?
What?
What is the citizen?
There's a number on this? Oh, here we go.
There's different, I found different numbers on it. So, you know, I if I remember correctly, it was like in the ballpark of like $500,000 to $1.5 million bucks was like what they use in economic models where they're trying to, you know, evaluate other things. So that I use that as, so,
wow.
you know, I use that, which I think is a low ball estimate, but, you know, I use that for, okay, if we put this value on how many people were harmed, and then let's see, you know, there's good data on how much incarcerated people's earnings are less over their lifetime because you can't get a job, you can't get all this, you can't, until recently, this is mind blowing, until recently, if you had any kind of cannabis arrest, you couldn't get financial aid.
Whoa.
So you couldn't get it. So going to school, forget for cannabis,
you
for
be
anything,
educated.
it was basically out of the question. Even if you just got arrested, and you know, some of these draconian states where 1 or 2 joints could get you 5-10 years.
Wow.
So, and then you come out and you can't get a job, you can't get a loan, can't get an education.
I think it's so important to teach people because you can have them, like if you're educated the right way, then you have the ability to choose if it's right or wrong based on proper information. So if I lay something out, and I know the facts of it, as opposed to being taught it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, and then you automatically have this preconceived notion that this thing here is bad without any other education. I think it's very important because it's like, okay, this is how it's good for you. This is how it can be abused, but overall, it's a plant, right? And it seems like what you were saying earlier on the previous show, which was shocking to me. I didn't know that cannabis drew like toxins from whatever the soil. That's amazing to me. So it seems like it's this super plant. But I think the education piece of it is you put it out there. Here are the facts. Now you can, as a person, you can determine if it's good or bad for you or not. But at least this is what it is, and you don't have this jaded viewpoint on this particular thing. And you can say, okay, I don't care. I know this, like your students who just was there just to learn about it, which is kudos to them because they have a more informed knowledge. But I know this. In my mind, it's bad, and in my mind, it's good, or in my mind, it's neutral. Like it could be this or it could be that. So I think it's very important to give people the facts and let them determine if it's good or bad for you or not.
Yeah, and especially when you look at the history of cannabis, where for decades we were fed propaganda and miseducation about the plant. So a lot of the stuff that people know or believe about it is actually false. And even now, where you know I had to help design this curriculum for these degree programs, and I'm willing to bet that there's going to be other colleges that are saying maybe contradictory things or different things in their classes than from my school, from a different school, because there weren't really any sources of, you know, a standardized, here are the facts on cannabis. You know, there's no like cannabis fact book. And some of this stuff is still debated. And, you know, it's like, it's not like if you take, you know, an accounting class and every accounting class in the country will agree that, you know, accounts receivable goes on this side and accounts payable go, or whatever. Whereas with cannabis, there's still, you know, there are no textbooks yet. There's maybe a handful of textbooks.
Or your book.
Well, my book, but I wouldn't consider this a textbook, you know, and compared to like, you know, macroeconomics, 5th edition or whatever. But because higher ed is now in the mix, I think we're on the path to getting to that place you described where anyone will be able to see the facts and make their own decisions. But up until recently, even just getting the facts, you had to dig.
Yeah.
And you don't know, like, you know, you could go on YouTube right now and watch 1,000 guys teach you how to grow weed all differently. And it's like, what are their qualifications, you know?
100%.
Even if they've been growing weed for 20 years, how do you know if it's good? You know, from YouTube or whatever. So
he led into a question of mine.
Well, we got to get wrapping it up.
But just very quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think in order to get an accurate depiction, I'm actually curious on your thought process too, just conversation starter, you know, shit stir. Do you think that in order to get an accurate depiction, if marijuana is good or bad for the person, they have to experiment in some kind of way? Whether it's like, okay, my elbow hurts. Let me put some oil in it to see if it helps me out. Or let me see how I feel when I consume marijuana. Do you think you have to actually interact with it? Because like you said, everybody is different. And everybody literally is different.
Yeah.
So do you think you have to experience it to see
How you do
how you deal with it? Just like, oh God. Well, it's okay. Let's look at wine or alcohol. Some people can drink wine and be perfectly fine.
Yep.
Other people can drink wine and be like, I would never touch that shit.
Right.
Like, never touch that shit because my head hurts and I get a little woozy. So like, do you think that people have to do that to get an accurate depiction of how their body reacts to it?
Kind of, I think so, yeah. And I would encourage people to
Of course you will, Mike.
But
of course you will. Please.
I'm biased.
Like, please try.
But I think, you know what, all kidding aside, it goes back to set and setting and dosage, right? So if you are trying to experiment and you have an intended use case, whether it's like, you know, arthritis or, you know, you want to try what it means to be high off cannabis or whatnot, or, you know, you have a specific ailment, you know, if you have some guidance and do your research, I feel like it's generally 9 times out of 10, the risk is very, very low. And really there's no you could read in my book, I could describe what it's like to be high, but unless you try it, it's not really, you know, it's like, you know.
I like it. And it's actually making me want to replace a question for the next episode, which I might do after approval from my co-host. But to sum it up, value of a marijuana education, it's a budding industry that is flowering. Those were intentional word choices. And to have nuanced information about that industry specifically is going to put you in a very, very small demographic of people that will be of extreme use as this industry develops. We're going to see you all next time for the question that I'd like to be, are there different types of marijuana highs? See you next time.
On the next episode of the 8 Question Show.
Traditionally, people talk about, oh, is this a sativa or an indica or a hybrid? And that's all nonsense. Everything, first of all, most modern cannabis genetically is a hybrid today. And second of all, it doesn't matter because it's all about the terpenes and the cannabinoid content.